ذکر ہے وہ آپ کی خدمت میں پیش کرنا چاہتا ہوں. بسم اللہ اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان اللعین الرجیم. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. اذا وقعت الواقعہ لیس لواقعتها کاذبہ خافضۃ رافعہ اذا رجت الارض رجہ وبست الجبال بسہ فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم ثلة من الأولين وخلیل من الآخرین. صدق اللہ العلی العظیم. جب ہونے کی وہ ہونے والی، اس وقت اس کے ہونے میں کسی کو انکار کی گنجائش نہ ہوگی، کسی کو پست کرنے والی، کسی کو بلند کرنے والی. جب زمین کانپے گی تھر تھرا کر، اور پہاڑ ریزہ ریزہ ہو جائیں گے چورا ہو کر، جسے روزن کی دھوپ میں غبار کے باریک ذرے پھیلے ہوئے ہوں گے، اور تم 3 قسم کے ہو جاؤ گے. تو داہنی طرف والے کیسے داہنی طرف والے، اور بائیں طرف والے کیسے بائیں طرف والے. اور جو سبقت لے گئے وہ تو سبقت ہی لے گئے، وہی مقرب بارگاہ جن کے چین کے باغوں میں اگلوں میں سے ایک گروہ اور پچھلوں میں سے تھوڑے. صدق اللہ العلی العظیم. And English ہے: when the event befalls, there is no denying that it will befall, abasing some, exalting others. When the earth is shaken with a shock, and the hills are ground to powder, so that they become scattered dust. And you will be 3 kinds. First, those the right hand. What of those on the right hand? And then those on the left hand. What of those on the left hand? And the foremost in the race. And the foremost in the race. Those are they who will be brought nigh in the gardens of delight, a multitude of the old and a few those of the later time. Sadaq Allahu Aliyul Azim. Salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil. Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Maulana, please start your session. And alhamdulillah, there is one farmaish for a few minutes of Masayif for Bibi Ummul Baneen after the session, just for us to be, feel the sorrow of and the pain of the Masuma. Please, Maulana.
Ji, Jazakallah, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغه مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فطر الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميادان أرضه أفضل الدين معرفته ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خير المبشرين والمنذرين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Please allow me one moment just to share
And in the meanwhile, if we can recite a Surah Fatiha for today's sponsors, Marhumin. One Surah Fatiha followed by 3 Surah Ikhlas for Sayyid Mustafa Ali Muswi, Sayyid Muhammad Askari Jafri, Fatima Jafri, Sayyid Mehdi Jafri, Leila Jafri, Sayyid Kazim Hussain Rizvi, Masuma Jafri, Sayyid Afsar Razvi, Suraya Jafri, Azam Jafri, Sayyid Muhammad Akhil Jafri, Zahra Jafri, Razia Begum, Tayyaba Jafri, Riyazat Ali Jafri, and all marhumin and marhumat. Bismillah.
Yunus Bhai, can you see me and hear me?
Yes, alhamdulillah.
Thank you. I'm still away from home, so I don't have my usual setup. So it's just making sure. Jazakallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, dearest listeners, viewers, elders, youngers, my peers, beloved creation of Allah. We continue with the discussion of Amirul Mu'mineen, as-salatu was-salamu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, regarding Nahjul Balagha's sermon number 1, as we know it. And in this sermon, we've reached the point in which we're talking about the sending of the prophets, alayhi salam. And in that, before this, the last 2 Sundays, we were looking at ahad, which was oath, and mithaq. And we talked about what the oath was and what the mithaq was in reference to the verses of the Quran and what they have mentioned about that. And now we continue as we look at the reasoning behind why the messengers were sent. So what we see is the messengers being sent is an entire system. And in this system, for example, we begin over here on this slide, فَبَعْثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا. So فَبَعْثَ is a word that is, ba'atha means to send forth, to spread, to diffuse. It means diffuse as in like when things are spreading out evenly, or even to act to revive something. So when we send with an official mechanism, this is also ba'atha. So ba'atha has a meaning of sending in which we're looking at something that is sent with official regard and something that is sent to enliven and revive something that perhaps might no longer be as alive as it should be. فَبَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا وَوَاتَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ أَنْبِيَاءَ. And we sent to them, and watara is referring to basically a succession, meaning one after another. So we see that there's a succession of prophets sent. According to some of the narrations, the number is believed to be around 124,000. Although we know that we don't see all those names in the Quran, of course, we see a select few. However, that succession that we're talking about is that there is constantly one after another. Some were multiple at the same time upon the earth, and some were sent one after another, as in like they would be present, but they would take station once the prophet of the time had passed on, or sometimes there would be a gap. where we see maybe, for example, 6 centuries gap between the second last prophet alayhi salam and the last Khatam al-Nabiyyin sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. So there is a succession here, and this is a system. So what is this telling us? And I think that, you know, if we perhaps compare it to maybe some systems that we would design, if you look at our systems for notifications, it's not easy. I think people who work, for example, and are managed or are managers themselves know the delicacy of the notification. I think one of the best ones, or one of the ones that tickles me the most, would be a gentle reminder, friendly reminder. And, you know, why is that word or that term being used before the notification? It's being used basically because we don't want to, you know, maybe get someone to be defensive or to be, you know, so defensive. Why? Because what do you mean? Did I forget, or am I incompetent? Or there's a whole probably multitude of reasons, not maybe none of them good, or maybe even some good, regarding why people get offended or defensive or even just annoyed and irritated. Then what happens is friendly reminder, gentle reminder. Then we go on to notification. Then we go on to final notification, final notice, for example, and all of these things that we use as reminders for each other. So there are ways in which we remind ourselves, from all of those scary reminders to even simple ones like what you have to buy the next day or what you have to put into your calendar. So all of these reminders that we do are either through our digital diaries or notes or stickies, or through, you know, other, you know better than me. So when we look at the reminder system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do we see? We see the reminder system is someone who's being sent, who's an individual just like us in appearance, meaning. So what we see is someone who is not perhaps a big angel of light with wings. Instead, we see that. You know, I think that perhaps it would be hard to envision, but if we were to have that foresight and that depth of imagination to say, imagine and come with me, let's say we're looking at a world where angels are sent as prophets. So what happens is one after another, an angel is coming. Now the angel is glowing of light, beautiful and magnificent in appearance. We're all in awe of the angel. The angel flies down, flies up. It would still, maybe it would increase some people's faith. I don't know. I think that people who didn't want to believe would still say it's some alien, and they're not, you know, they're not divinity, but rather they are a different species. They've evolved in that way, or so on. There's always going to be ways to do it. We think that no, people would believe if it was very obvious, like if a huge hammer appeared in the sky and then did this or smashed the infidels, etc. These types of things, but I think we would always find some kind of an excuse or the other. The question is, what is the amount of evidence that we need? What is that par, that threshold, that level where we would say, okay, this is how much evidence we need? And what you'll find is that I think we would have to go through the experimentation of alternate universes where this is happening to actually see it unfold. Otherwise, it may be right or wrong. Of course, just coming out from my tongue doesn't mean much. However, if you're looking at, you know, a community, a world where the revelations were more obvious, they came down as big writings in the sky, and, you know, thunder, lightning flashed and wiped people out here, there, whenever they disobeyed, and so on. You could add to that picture as much as you want. Then would actually people believe more is the question. I don't think so. Because what we're saying is that seems to be a lot of evidence, but really the people who believe with the evidence that there is. And so if you recall, there have been miracles. There are miracles where, you know, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was asked to split the moon and to do this and to do that. We see in history other prophets also showing miracles. We see that, if you look at the Quran, openly stating the state of disbelief of Bani Israel, even after Hazrat Musa alayhi salam freed them from Fir'aun, and they see 12 rivers created. I mean, what more evidence is there than that? And windows within the walls. So, you know, those of us that hold the Quran to be true, and we've heard the tafsir, we know what happened. Then even after that, for the Quran to say that there was a period of disbelief and there was always objection to the rulings and decrees and to the messages that Hazrat Musa alayhi salam is bringing. So what level of miracle or obvious evidence do we actually need? Really, you'll find that those of faith don't need, what they need is, well, I wouldn't say they don't need much, but what they need is what is here. Because when we say much, that would indicate that there isn't enough maybe, but there is more than enough. It's ample, everything around us. So again, what we see is a succession being sent. The other thing we see is that when they're being sent, they're like us. The second thing it does is that besides, sending someone who is like us, for the first reason, the angel comparison, the second reason would be that we don't develop a sense of inferiority in a way. In other words, we see some magnificent beings that are being sent, and they are Allah's chosen ones. And then already there's a species conflict, perhaps, in that. I'm guessing human ego wouldn't tolerate that very much either. So what we see is that the appearance like us, and then their humbleness and humility, and their service of humanity, and their position put them in a place where they were usually being prosecuted, they were being tyrannized, they were being, there was pain being inflicted upon them from all sides because of the message they were sending. So in that situation, what you have is someone very vulnerable who's not coming and dominating by force and leading an army and a legion of angels. Rather, it's somebody who's coming without any obvious wealth and power, usually, for the most part, from sheep herders to carpenters to simple wage-earning people, and sometimes coming from, all different backgrounds. But what you see is a very humble person, a person that just comes to remind you. When you look at the world of notifications and how scary some of the world's notifications are, those of us that, hopefully, God forbid, never have to get a legal notice of some kind, those things are stressful, are they not? Even if it's just a traffic violation. So in this world of scary notifications, what we have is a system of love, a system of, a humble approach as a reminder. When we write friendly reminder on top, it might not ensue, we might not see what follows is actually a friendly reminder. It can sometimes be like the situation where one says, and we commonly hear it in North America, not to be rude, followed by a highly rude statement. So in that, what we see is we see a reminder of love here and mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And liyastaduhum, to admonish them. Liyastadu, alif dal ya, this Arabic root word, to deliver, to demand, to prosecute, these types of synonyms come up. So there is an official flavor to this word because we're talking about the mithaq, and that was the covenant. Fatara has been used in the Quran, like about, I think, 8 times as a search I did, but it means creation usually, and every meaning in the Quran has come up in the sense of creation, nature, and what Allah has also put inherent within all of creation. So we say fitrat in Urdu to mean like the nature, almost that which is liked or disliked by somebody and how they express themselves, that kind of nature as well. So we do have that inherent nature within us as well. In other words, are we beings that are comprised of the experience that occur after birth, or even maybe before birth, or are we coming with something more even before that? Did we exist? So if we believe in what the Quran says regarding the souls that were created all at that time before we came to the earth, therefore this would be the second stage. And if this is the second stage of our existence, at least according to what we see in 7:172, the verse. So according to that, this would be the second stage, which means that when we're coming, are we coming with anything from there? And how much from the previous stage are we coming with in terms of our nature and our experiences and memory, or how we're going to behave? That's also kind of hard to determine, definitely. In the theoretical realm, you know, one could say that, well, look at my children, perhaps we see them being different, even though we raised them similarly, but then their DNA is also different. But then identical twins may also be different, who have identical DNA, but they were perhaps raised the same. But then one could argue that there was a difference in the way they were raised slightly, or one was a favorite, and so on. So, you know, believing that we are coming from the previous stage, though, I think it's not difficult for me to believe that we are coming with some nature and something with us, within us as well, because that's important now. Because what happens is, if there is something within us from the previous stage of existence, then what is it, and how much is it, and is that enough to guide us? Because what you'll see in the terminology used by Amirul Mu'mineen salatu wassalam alayhi is very specific, and it seems to indicate that there is something within us which is being stimulated and triggered by the message. So therefore, the official demand or the reminder, you know, the official notice that you have made a promise, this is what we're talking about. So do we remember we made the promise? I don't think so. I haven't met anyone who did, or nor did I. But how do we know we made the promise? Well, we know because the Quran says that we did. So that's my main reason why I believe it. So if the Quran says I did, then how much of that is within me right now if I don't remember that happening? Well, I think there is something within, because there's an inner sense that tells us what's right and wrong. It's pretty much the primary basis for what we do in the world, because when we see things and hear things, we react to them. And the reason we react to them is our intellect and what our intellect is saying about it, and how we perceive it. So oftentimes there's a judgment with that, saying, yes, that's right, we shake our head, accept, saying that's interesting and we learn from it, or saying, no, that's wrong and we object to it. Or there's other possibilities too, but in a general sense, this is what we do. So when we're doing that, and why are we doing that? Because there's something within us, there is an inner instinct, and it seems to be universal. You know, we may look at the innate nature of man, as philosophy has argued, regarding what is right and what is wrong, and how is that determined in a society, and is it all based upon experiences, or are there certain things that we see common in cultures? For example, no one would say stealing and murder and so on is right, unless there's some justification for it that they're giving. But in the general sense, we know that crime is crime, and that seems to be universal. We haven't had a conflict of cultures in that, perhaps in some aspects of it, but not in the major things that we see. So again, is there something within us? And if there is, then is there a reminder enough? Now, keeping in mind that if I have faith that Allah created me and He knows best, then His system is just, then it would be that it is enough as a reminder. So admonish, the official notice is sent, and then creation remembers. And what do they remember? So وَيُذَكِّرُوهُمْ, and dhikr, dhakara, dhal, kafra, this is a word that we know means to remind. Zikr, you know, sometimes is also used for mention. So when we talk about someone, we are doing their zikr. So it comes in the form of mention, but even in that talking about them and mentioning them, there is a reminding ourselves as well. And usually it's referred to something that is not present and that is not in front of us. Rather, it is something that has been forgotten. So what we see is that it'll not be manifest. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who cannot be manifest with our senses are limited, they are in the realm of creation, and they cannot perceive the creator. So therefore, eyesight and sound waves will be deficient, and so will intellect and memory and imagination, it'll be deficient. So when our faculties of sensing the obvious or the manifest in front of us, and our faculties of sensing what is not manifest, so the five senses for the zahir and the intellect for the ghaib, even when these fail, then is there a way to do zikr of Allah? Is there a way to mention him and remind ourselves? So that is the miracle of creation, and especially what Allah has put into humanity and through language and through messengers and eloquence and expression of explanation of Tawheed. What we see is we are able to do that. We are able to talk about this being without pointing to him, without giving him a physical form, or without dividing him into multiple parts, without making him divisible, nor making him increasable. I don't think that's a word, but you know what I mean. So without expanding upon him even. And we can do all of these things, and this is because, of course, of the sermons that you hear from the holiest messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala. And also from the Aimma alayhi salam, and from the prophets before that, what we have been told, is how we are able to express it. So there is a reminding system here, and in this reminding system, what we're seeing is that it sparks something within. وَيُذَكِّرُوهُمْ مَنْسِي بِنِعْمَتِهِ. And so mansi is from nasa, which is to forget, and then ni'mati, his grace, his blessings, everything that he has sent upon us, from the smallest blessing to the largest and most life-altering blessings, all of these. So there's a system here now. In this system, what we see is there is a forgetfulness. What is the philosophy of forgetfulness as well? In forgetfulness, what we have done is, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done is a lot and infinite. I couldn't possibly explain it, and what is being done. All of this is beyond me. Even today, just as I was mentioning to somebody that I have to go now online for the study group, and they said, oh, you're going for a dars, and that word dars kind of shook me, because dars would indicate that I am this is a class and I'm teaching it, and the word study group is much safer and more suited to me, because I am in no way teaching Nahjul Balagha, nor am I qualified to teach it, nor could I ever explain the words of Amirul Mu'mineen as-salatu was-salamu alayh. However, as a study group, I think that we are simply looking at it together, and through our discussions and monologue and then discussions, we are arriving at conclusions. And so we say that, there is a sense of forgetfulness. So why do we see this philosophy of forgetfulness, and did it have to be there? It didn't have to be there. But through forgetfulness, Allah also has created a system of testing now. And what happens is, when we look at forgetting and remembering, then there's much discussion to be had on forgetting and remembering itself, from the neurological to the metaphysical. And where is memory stored is an important question too. And the areas of our brain that ignite with positive impulses, when we see the neurons communicating with each other, our brain cells talking to each other, and memory areas are stimulated. And the question is, is the memory in that part of the brain, or is it in a different area? If that's the hardware, is there a software here too? And so when we look at a hard disk in a computer, we know that the memory is stored in the hard disk, in its material, because upon it is written zeros and ones in the binomial language of computers in a series, which allows the memory to be stored there. Fine. That's agreeable. In the same way, we see the brain turns on and off. However, the brain turning on and off, it also starts resting. So then when it turns on and off, there's still a little bit of mystery as to why the same pattern of brain cells turn on and off, and then we remember or we don't remember, for example. And, we do know that brain trauma can lead to memory loss, and various organic diseases of the brain can cause dementia of many kinds. And so, yes, there is a connection there, definitely, in the brain manifesting the memory, absolutely. But is it actually stored in the brain, or is there a deeper metaphysical presence there where we see it stored? So those questions are hard to prove in the way we are proving neuronal communication. That's more metaphysical and getting more theoretical. So we rely upon the discussion of nafs and ruh and qalb. And indeed, there's much discussion to be had there as well. But here, just about, forgetting and remembering. Well, one thing we see in the world of psychology, or, just in our thought process, is that when we remember things also based on priority. For example, we see it in the simplest ways, where perhaps there's a wedding anniversary and the husband has forgotten for some reason. That seems to be the more common picture painted in various stories and incidents. So if we see that happening, then there can be a justifiable anger on the part of the missus because the mister did not remember. And that in a way entails that perhaps it wasn't important to them. And the things that are important is what we remember. Now, I'm not saying that's always true. I, wouldn't want to get anybody in trouble. But what I'm saying is that there is definitely an urgency involved in something important, and we remember it better. And we see it many times. We see it in those of us who are like me, last minute crammers before a test or exam in school, college days. And so even now when I'm, presenting and lecturing, etc., I'm always running to catch up. And so last minute, I study a week before the exam, nothing goes into my mind. I study the moment before the exam and what happened. And now everything's just, the urgency is there, the adrenaline is rushing. And when we're forced to remember something, then we do. I would sometimes say to students in class that if you actually had a gun to your head and you believe that person was going to shoot you if you didn't do what they said, and what they were telling you to do was to study this chapter in 15 minutes and then pass this test, you probably would be able to do it, just because when you push your mind, the mind can accomplish amazing things. So when we are when we're looking at it in that way, then what you see is it's also a test of love, because when we love something, we remember it more. And the more we love something, the harder it is for us to forget it. And, people who, for example, when we love other human beings and, we cannot remove them from our mind when we are away from them, their picture is in our mind, or our thoughts are always drifting towards them. We contact them, communicate with them. And what we see is the more of that there is, the less likely we are to forget. So without that forgetfulness, we would not have that whole system of a test of what is prioritized by us and how does what we remember express what we consider as more important. Maybe not always, but in many circumstances. So I think that, it allows us to have a whole system here. And I mean, on the one hand, one could say, why did God have to make us forget? Why did that? Why this? Why that? On the other hand, what we see is that there is a deeper wisdom within it, a wisdom that perhaps we would only realize if we saw a universe created without that type of system or that type of law. وَيَحْتَجُّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِالتَّبْلِيغِ. So the word, here where we say yahtaju, what we see is there is a ha and ja root here, ha and jim root here. And the ha and jim root is, hajj, which is also used in the form of protest. So that's why here we have the English word protest. So protest, and to what convey a protest? Bit tabligh. Now tabligh is an interesting word, because protest is in the sense that, it's visible, it's in front of us, and it's saying basically, what do we do when we protest? What we say is we object to what is happening, and we explain that it shouldn't be as such, but rather it should be as so. So this is the basics of a protest. And here as well, prophethood, we see the reasoning behind it to remind us that what is happening is not right and things need to change. The word tabligh, though, is interesting, because tabligh in the Quran is used, really for once and for one moment and for one purpose. So we see it in one ayat. Excuse me. And we see, بَلِّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ. And we know the purpose of revelation of that verse was in Surah Ma'idah, but it was for the event of Ghadir. So there we see بَلِّغ. And Baligh was therefore for the completion of the religion and for the announcement of the imamat of Amir al-Mu'mineen salatu wassalamu alayhi. So when we look at tabligh and the definition of the Quran, it is deeply rooted in the spreading of wilaya. The wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the wilaya of the Ma'sumin salatu wassalamu alayhi. The word tabligh, when we look at it in English, it will have many meanings. For example, we'll see conveyance as a synonym, notification, arriving at something, and arriving at, and something to which you desire, you pursue, or you seek, and also seeking to, or intending to, a time, place, or any affair, any event, any action, any enfolding of our will. So in this word, there is a sense of arrival, and that means that there is a destination and the individual needs to reach there. So that is a reminder that we have a destination. And when we're saying there's an arrival place, then what happens is the purpose of prophethood is not now to come and to just, what we say, criticize us and to tell us that we're heathens and to tell us that the hellfire awaits us. Rather more, it is to take us to a certain place. So there's somewhere we have to get, and someone is coming and saying, let's go there because it's much better than here. And there's a lot to do. And this is just one stage. And there's a whole purpose of your creation that is beyond this. And it is to unfold, and so on. Sometimes we look at the world, and when we look at the world and its complexity, we look at the world and the sadness and happiness in the world, we see the rewards and the punishments, the pain and the bliss, we see the love and the hate, etc. Everything in the world, and there's so many challenging stages, and there's so much to praise about it, from how a child grows and the conflicts they go through, to the struggles that make them stronger, and going on to develop and to achieve amazing feats, and to, be applauded by humanity for what some people have done. All of these things are so complex. And in their complexities, we see further complexity. We see within these complexities, we see individuals creating entire universes. We see fantasy writers creating a world that draws so many fans and ends up becoming stories and movies. And then the brand comes into every aspect of someone's life. And there are futuristic worlds, from historical worlds to fantastical worlds to so on. And all of this adventure and excitement and the potential of it in the human mind and imagination and intellect, when we see this complexity, and that's what I was trying to have you envision if you're with me on that, then we compare it to heaven. And we say, well, there will be gardens and rivers, and there will be trees bearing fruits, and you will eat of what you want and drink of what you will. And all that you can imagine will occur, and so on. It doesn't paint a picture that is complex, let's say. You will notice that all of the description of the next stage and even the previous stage is in a very simple sense. And I think one reason for that is, like our five senses only absorb what really we are capable of and what is useful to us. So I do not see the Wi-Fi waves in this room, for example, bombarding my eyes. I do not see many of the other waves that are around us other than the visible light, and same thing with sound, etc. Then, that allows me to function. And if any of these senses were heightened too much, then it would actually be a deterrent to my function. It would not be a promoter of function. It wouldn't enhance me. And so in the same way, our intellect and what we are able to absorb and remember, that as well, that's something that I think also is limited. So would we be able to fully comprehend what's to come after or to come before? Perhaps more than we know. To a certain extent, we probably could maybe understand a little more, especially as human capacity and intellect has increased. But the message is eternal. for all generations and previous centuries to the coming generations, to the end of time. The message is eternal. So there's a foundation in the message and a basis. And then what happens is, according to our intellect, we will understand some things more obvious than others. So why would there be such a complexity in this world that we're supposed to really refrain ourselves from a lot of it, and to, not focus on some things and to prioritize other things? Yet what we see is that heaven is such a simple place, and some would argue they would get bored, for example, just sitting there and then eating from a tree. And of course, that's natural. That's not something that is going to be unique to this generation. Everybody knows that they want a mix of things. And so the question is, would we still be in the same state of mind that we are in? Or would our state of mind, because of what we're perceiving now, have changed so much? So our perception could drastically change. So it's possible that our perception drastically changes and the painting that we saw is as is, but however, now there's a sense of eternal bliss. Because really, when we look at bliss and happiness and what we achieve after a struggle in life that makes us feel good, from passing a difficult exam to getting the job that we struggled for, to finally achieving a certain level of knowledge, or any kind of really status in any hierarchy that we work hard for, there's a satisfaction. Would there be that satisfaction in the next life? Well, that satisfaction, perhaps it could be there all the time. Is that a possible state of mind? Why not? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create us with these stimuli causing chemical releases in our brain and affecting our emotions and causing us to feel this way or that way, then could it not be a system where it's always in bliss? Certainly it could be. The other possibilities, because that's all we can do, is look at possibilities within the realm of our intellect. They all may be completely wrong, and perhaps it's something completely that I'm not even able to envision, imagine, entertain in any way in my mind. But what if perhaps it is complex? Maybe it is 1,000,000 times more complex in this world, and maybe in the next realm there's infinite possibilities. Perhaps there will be intergalactic communication and universes. Maybe heaven is many, many planets as far as we know. Perhaps it is many dimensions altogether. Perhaps there will be evolving communities that you might visit. For example, there's an infinite realm of possibilities as to what's to happen and what the role will be. And is it infinite enjoyment, or is there a raising of your status and you're given a different duty? There's many, many, many things that could unfold. So when we see, that destination, now what happens is, what we see is someone is reminding us that, look, we have to go on to the next stage. This is but the bridge. We saw the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that the one who is living in this world like they're here forever, it's like they're building a home on a bridge that is about to collapse at any moment, and they should be trying to traverse the bridge. So even though we have to live in this world, as our Aimma said, live in this world, plan and live in this world and make the effort like you're here forever, but also like you may leave at any moment. So that delicate balance is not easy, but we are forever the traveler. So as a traveler, we set up, but the purpose of setting up is because it's a matter of principle. It's a matter of the next generation. It's a matter of utilizing our time wisely. So we do indulge in a setup process in our jobs, careers, our homes, our assets, our children, and supporting them, and so on. At the same time, knowing that the next breath is not guaranteed in any way. So we are travelers. And that word tabligh is telling you that it's about pulling somebody, or rather guiding them towards a certain direction. So the direction is something that the one who is guiding us has seen. So they have envisioned it and seen it with their eyes, and they have been sent from there to guide us. So we see the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all the succession of prophets. This is what we see happening. There is a tabligh over here. And then, excuse me. And then we see وَيُثِيرُ لَهُمْ دَفَائِنَ الْعُقُولِ. And when we look at the word yuthiru, it is used in ways like to provoke, to agitate, to shake something up. And like when the earth is shaken up and something comes out of it. And lahum dafa'inul uqul. What are we shaking up? Something that has become buried, and that is uqul, intellect. So the definition of intellect is very important, because intellect sometimes is taken as IQ, in the sense of uqul, the way it's used in our metaphysical sense when we consider it in the form of what the Quran says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, do you not use your intellect? You know, that is being addressed to many who are considered to have high intellect in society and have high IQs and perhaps be very accomplished in their field of science, and having, you know, multiple doctorates and considered by their colleagues and peers to be one of high intellect. Yet there may be a denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. According to the Quran, therefore, the question is being asked, are you not using your intellect? So there may be intellect there and it's not being used. There's a deficiency in the utility of it. So that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, for the most part, everybody intellect. There will be exceptions where we see that intellect is not there. In those cases, there is an exception to what is asked of them by society and even by the religion itself. So in a general sense, if we have intellect, then utility of it is important. And burying it means that we're not utilizing our intellect. Intellect is something that, you know, has been defined by our Imam in a few different ways. And one of the simplest levels of definition of it, without going into the events so interesting, may consume more time. So just in this basic sense, level one, to be able to distinguish between what is right and wrong, that is also intellect. Or rather, I should say, to be able to distinguish between two things that are right, which of them is of more priority, or two things that are wrong, which of them is worse than the other. So to determine better between two, or to determine worse between two, that distinguishing has been used to define aql. And then we see another definition, the ability, the strength or the ability to gain marifa, which is sometimes described as knowledge, understanding, comprehension. So all of those kind of work, those synonyms, marifa of your imam. And also aql is defined as the ability to gain marifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it is through the 14 that we have understood that, through their qualities and through what has been manifested by them, or what has been said by them regarding him. So what we see is that intellect then should lead us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah created the intellect. And if we believe that, therefore in that intellect is where he has placed the ability that makes ashraful makhluqat. And there's probably a few reasons why that term has been used. And I think the main reason why a human may be called ashraful makhluqat is because we see the 14 masumin, the original creation and light of Allah, coming in that form and not in any other form of creation. So that is perhaps the highest honor. Also, we see a bestowal of intellect. And I think of, intellect as the ability to gain a marifa. So when we look at the metaphysical qalb, which is the metaphysical heart, where we have the seat of aql, then aql is that ability that allows us to gain marifa. And marifa, in one sermon of Amir al-Mu'mineen salatu wassalamu alayhi, Imam Ali says, and I'm just taking one line from there again, although it is a amazing 5 or 6 lines. And what's said is that as a human being, is the description is of a human, and Amir al-Mu'mineen says, you are that book which makes the hidden manifest. And I remember one of my dear brothers had that on his display pic as well, and I think that's where I caught my attention. And you are that hidden book which brings the hidden into the manifest, or I'm paraphrasing, but marifa is therefore things which are unseen, unheard, unsensed, also unimaginable in terms of shape and size and color and the various other qualities we use to bring things to the picture in our mind. When something is like that, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as what we're talking about, then to manifest it in our heart, to take that which is ghaib and to bring it up as some kind of could we call it now a concept? Could we call it a thought? Could we call it there is a symbolism in our mind? Perhaps. But that is therefore marifa now, and aql is what takes us in that direction. So when I look at aql now, what I look at is I don't look to see how good they are at mathematics. That tells me their numerical intelligence, yes. I don't look at how good they are at, for example, physics. So that gives me an idea of, again, their mathematics, and of course, the abstract thought as well, the ability to think about the abstract and to theorize, and so amazing abilities. But I don't look at them being the root of aql. There may be deductive reasoning, there logical thinking, some other abstract types of thinking. There are different intellectual abilities. And so, in those abilities, the one that is allowing us to understand and believe in Allah, I would say, therefore, in the creator who created aql, would be a use of it. Otherwise, I think that we are using it perhaps in some of its abilities, but not in the full sense that it was meant to be used. وَيُرُوهُمْ آيَاتِ الْمَقْدِرَةِ, and to manifest upon them the signs decreed. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because here Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets now for these signs, the signs that are decreed. So this means that what unfolds, what's to follow, is according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, signs that are enough. That means this should be enough. So when the scientist says, well, I would, if I have to talk to God on the day of judgment, then I will say I did not see enough evidence. You did not provide enough evidence, therefore I did not believe. Well, now that's the question again. What is the level of evidence that's needed? And as a human, we see the level of evidence needed, that even after asking for evidence and even after asking for miracles, we see people still disbelieving. So there's one demand from the individual, a human, that I want this level of evidence. And then there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us what the evidence is and what he considers to be evidence enough. Min saqfin fawqahum marfu'. And when we look at the word, saqaf, this is the roof, and marfu' is what is raised. So the roof that is raised above us, and that is what we see separates us from outer space, what our space shuttles have to traverse when they're trying to get out or when something is coming back in. So that is an incredible roof, and how it protects us from everything that's outside, and how it shelters us, and how it filters the sun to perfection so that we get exactly the amount of heat and light that we need. I mean, all the scientific qualities of the sun are incredible. Now, the choice, according to many, is that this came about because of what it happened to be. So it just happened. And if it just happened, then, it was a series of coincidences that would have occurred in this probability. So for this probability, like one in a big number, we would then have to say, well, then there's multiverses, and one of them would have had this probability of happening. But according to then Amir al-Mu'mineen here, no, that is evidence enough for you. So really, again, what is the level of evidence that is required by an individual? And when I look at the sky, for me, it's so simple and easy that I'm afraid perhaps I'm unable to understand the perspective of the one who says that that could just have happened in it, and the perfection in it, and how even the revolving planets, some of them, each of them have their own effect and their own purpose, and how Jupiter has accumulated many of the asteroids that would have destroyed Earth. Yet we see it acting as a protective magnet for objects flying towards us from the universe. And so everything in its place and balance and perfection. And, the earth and the ground and its stillness. So Amir al-Mu'mineen also talks about the earth and how Allah has laid the earth down for us, and how we don't notice that the earth is rotating at a speed of over 1,000 miles an hour. We don't notice that the revolution of the earth is well, I'm more of a kilometers person, but I know there's a lot of miles people too. So 67,000 miles per hour. And it said that our solar system is revolving as well, and it's going at a speed of 792,000 kilometers per hour. Those are speeds that are unimaginable. And so for gravity to play its role like that is amazing. Is that a coincidence? So one could say it is, but the perfection of it and the design of it for me is mind-blowing. So I just find that I enjoy science so much more when I look at it as something deliberate and something with, I can't say thought behind it, because thought is something that is a process created for us, and Allah, what he does or he does not do, because at his action, but even what is in him as a reflection, as a will, as an intent, as a desire, as a plan, as an execution of power, as a thought. I don't know what word would be appropriate, so I wouldn't use any word. But what we would say is that, if I study the human cell and I'm thinking about it as a design, and there is a designer, then it's far more fascinating for me to study it that way. And then I find that in general, we would be able to understand things perhaps a little faster, because understanding there is a deliberation behind any design allows us to theorize on the possible reasons for something happening with more clarity, or rather more direction. And then I think that would perhaps accelerate things. And so everything having a purpose, for example. But if we know it has a purpose, then we struggle to find that purpose. And if we think things are not purposeful, then we're not looking for the purpose. And therefore, we wait for chance to have us stumble upon it, and then to discover that technology. As much technology was discovered by chance, for example. Something had to happen for this to happen, that to happen, like the microwave invention, for example. So وَمِحَادَ تَحْتَهُمْ مَوْضُوعٌ, and the mihada is the ground, and so the ground was placed, mawdu, placed beneath them. So even the ground that we walk upon and the earth that is above us, even these, the sky that is above us, even these things are considered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be signs. Yet we need, perhaps it is us and what we are demanding. So I think it goes inversely proportional to our faith. The less our faith, the more miracle we need. The more our faith, the less miracle we need. But I would actually say that according to the definitions of Aima regarding akal, we would have to say then that it's actually the more we use our akal, the less miracle we need, and the less we use our akal, the more miracle we need. And by akal, that which allows the hidden to become manifest within, or within your qalb. And so the signs continue. And then what we see is وَمَعَايِشَ تُحْيِيهِمْ. Ma'aisha, the sustenance. So the sustenance, tuhyi, and hay is to live and to have life. So the sustenance that keeps them alive. So even food for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is considered a sign. وَأَجَالَ تُفْنِيهِمْ, and the time that perishes them, or the connections of all that is happening around them that causes them to wither. We know that everything is heading towards entropy. Kullu man alayha fan. The Quran announced the physics, later to be called entropy by physics, announced it quite early. And in Surah Rahman, wa kullu man alayha fan. So everything that is occurring in events is causing things to expire, to wither, to deteriorate. And this is very important, because then they say, well, why did there have to be an ending to things, and why does there have to be old age, and we see things withering? And well, first of all, it's temporary, and it's just one stage, and it doesn't have to be like this after in the next stage. Secondly, if it wasn't like that, we wouldn't know that there is a beginning to it. The fact that we see the expansion of the universe and we see the entropy and the energy changes, this tells us that there was a beginning. So that's even scientifically accepted. There's a beginning. And when there's a beginning, it tells us, for me, it tells me there's a beginner, there's an originator. So there's an original cause, therefore, because what has a beginning, therefore, must have begun by something. Then, of course, you get into the argument that what began Allah, but then we get into the infinite argument of cause and effect, and therefore, there had to be some kind of a beginning. But the way I look at it is that, as Allah always was, therefore, there was no beginning and no end. He created beginning and end. That means that we cannot apply it to him. So he was before beginning and end were created. The concept of it was that when there was something that was not there and it came into being, that was beginning. So before that, if we look at it as a moment, well, then there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there is perhaps nothing else, let's say. And then we know something begins. So that moment when you take from nothing is existing except for Allah, and he's the ultimate, that's why he's called Wajib al-Wujud in Islamic theological philosophy sometimes, where we're looking at the concept and ma'rifah of Allah. I don't know if the word philosophy should be used there, but when we're looking at, what some people call Islamic philosophy. And so what we see is that he's Wajib al-Wujud. He was in existence when nothing else was there. So everything else is secondary. Everything else might be fake or artificial. He's the one that's actually there. So he's here more, he's more manifest in us as a being, but we don't sense him. So in the same way, we see nothing exists and something comes to exist. Now a particle is there. That means space and time was needed. Well, space was needed for the particle. So we see space created, and that, we see that in the hadith of creation as well. Very quickly, because my time's run out, but we see the hadith sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that Allah said in the hadith Qudsi, if I had not to the sky, that if I had not wanted to create Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala. Excuse me, I would not have, if I didn't want to create him, I wouldn't have created the sky. And, if I didn't want to and so on. So what we see is that there needs to be something there and to put what we're putting in it. So whether the first thing that appears is nur, as I believe from what I've read in narrations, it is the nur awwal, nur masumin, nur of the 14, etc. So whatever is coming into existence, though, and everything that's coming into existence, now there's nothing, now there's a space and something appears. So when something appears, the space was created for it. So therefore, he is outside of space, because space was a concept and created and manifested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, when that object moved from point A to point B, it needed energy. So the energy also was created. So he created energy. So he is energy, well, not literally energy. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created energy. He has no beginning and no end because he created beginning and end. So before that, there was nothing like that. Then what we see is that it moves from point A to point B with the energy, and this is what we call time. So the interval between. So everything that was now coming into being, this basically means that if there was entropy, and there is, and if the circumstances around us are causing things to wither slowly, and everything is going to have an end, it had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, it tells us that there needed to be an originator. So what that's doing is that's creating for us a way and a path to understand him and to manifest him, because what that does is that allows us to see, our own creation. So when we understand his greatness and magnificence, we will understand what he has created within us. When we understand what he has created within us, we have the free will to appreciate it and accept it. When we appreciate and accept it and understand his greatness, we can understand, therefore, there must be something. And now I don't want to use the word greatness anymore because I used it for him, but there is something within us that is also great, or something within us that must be magnificent. And therefore, to appreciate it, to value it, and to nourish it, and to bring it to where he wants us to be, which is what we cannot see in this realm. But what we should know is that there is something after, like the child going through a difficult course, and the teacher is saying that you have to keep on doing this, and the child saying that this is boring, this is hard, I don't want to do this, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a reason for it. And as the child gains their abilities and their intellect, and they go on to do wonderful things, they realize that there was a purpose behind that hardship. And so, he too is guiding us towards this level that humanity should reach. in terms of the ascendance of our soul, in terms of our understanding, our concept, our intellect. But, you know, if he didn't put us through these struggles, then we wouldn't get any credit for it. He also wants us to get the credit for it. So what we see is there is that initiative upon our part that causes us to have to do this. Lam yukhlillahu subhanahu khalqa. And I believe I've gone, I wanted to stop actually 2 minutes from now. So I know that, so my intent was to complete this slide, and there's just 4 or 5 more left, but there is a danger of taking more minutes there, and your time is valuable. And upon this day, we have reached what is known as the Shahada date of the magnificent lady that we know as Bibi Baneen. And the mother of Hazrat Abbas Alamdar and the Zoja of Amir al-Mu'mineen. A lady who from the beginning of her marriage dedicated her life. Her acceptance of the marriage and happiness at the proposal shows us her level of Iman and Ma'rifah, her love for the Ahlul Bayt. It shows us her deep understanding of the religion. The selection of her and the sending of the proposal shows us the magnificent qualities of her family. Honor, nobility, valor, hospitality, 4 qualities mentioned. And in these 4 qualities, there is much to discuss, but we will move on to the lady herself, who from the very first day upon entering the threshold of her new home and her family, she's greeted by the children of Bibi Fatima al-Zahra and Bibi al-Baneen, whose name is also Fatima. We call her Fatima Kilabia, Fatima bint Hazam ibn Rabi' ibn Kilab. We see that Bibi al-Baneen, alayhi salam, what we see is that she immediately says, "Do not call me mother, for your mother is a great person, and your mother is a great personality, and I am not worthy of such a stature. Call me Baneen." She herself wanted that. She herself diverted them from calling her mother, calling her that name, because she had such high esteem of Bibi Fatima al-Zahra. We see that to her children, she always taught them to consider, to know that these are the children of the Prophet and these are Sayyideh Shababi Ahlul Jannah, to the point that Hazrat Abbas always called, them by titles and not by their names, and not even brother and sister. But we see that Hazrat Abbas, even in the last moments of his life, जब इमाम के जानू पे सर था भाई का, तो ये लम्हा इमाम हुसैन के लिए कैसा था सोचना नामुमकिन है। दिल फट जाता है सोच के कि वो भाई कि इमाम हुसैन ने कहा कि मेरे भाई क्या आज के लिए पाला था आपको, जब सर जानू पे रखा कमरे बनी हाशिम का, और जानू पे रख के जब आंख में तीर देखा और एक आंख में खून देखा, तो छोटे भाई ने बड़े भाई से कहा कि भैया आप मेरी आंख से खून साफ कर दीजिए, आपको जहमत ना देता, लेकिन आखिरी सांसें हैं और आते हुए सबसे पहले आपकी जियारत हुई थी, जाते हुए भी आप ही की जियारत करना चाहता हूँ। तो इमाम ने जब खून पहुंचा था तो इमाम ने भी एक तस्करा किया था, और इमाम हुसैन ने कहा था भैया अब्बास मेरी भी एक तमन्ना है, और तुमने सारी जिंदगी मुझे मौला कह के पुकारा है, बस मैं ये चाहता हूँ अब्बास कि तुम मुझे भाई कहो। तो वो हुक्म मानना भी हजरत अब्बास के लिए आसान नहीं था कि पूरी जिंदगी फौरन माँ का ख्याल आया। कहा कि या तो तसव्वुरात में या फिर वाकई जुमला भी कहा हो, या इंसान सोचता तो है ही है कि कहा हो कि माँ मुझे माफ कर दीजिएगा। اب حکم ہے میرے مولا کا اور ایک طرف آپ کا حکم تھا. یعنی کہ ساری زندگی بی بی ام البنین نے یہی تو پوچھا تھا. بی بی ام البنین نے جب بشیر آیا تھا محلے میں، بنی ہاشم کے محلے میں، اور اعلان ہوا تھا قد قتل الحسین، کہا تھا کہ کیا حسین؟ کون سے حسین؟ اور پھر پوچھا کیا میرا عباس کہاں تھا؟ یعنی کہ جس کی میں نے تربیت کی تھی حسین کی حفاظت کے لیے، جس کو ساری زندگی یہی سکھایا تھا، وہ کہاں تھا جب میرا حسین مارا گیا؟ یہاں تک کہ جب بی بی ام البنین کے آخری وقت تھا، اور بعض روایات میں ملتا ہے کہ ان کو زہر ملا تھا، کیونکہ بی بی ام البنین کے مرثیے جو جنت البقیع میں امام حسین کے لیے، شہداء کربلا کے لیے، اپنے بیٹوں کے لیے جو پڑھتی تھیں، ان مصائب میں اتنا اثر تھا کہ مدینے میں بھی بغاوت کا شک ہونے لگ گیا تھا مروان بن حکم کو. تو ہم کیا دیکھتے ہیں کہ وہاں پہ زہر کا دیا گیا، اور ہم دیکھتے ہیں کہ آخری سانسوں میں بی بی ام البنین، ایک روایت یہ بھی ملتی ہے کہ بی بی فضہ نے پوچھا بی بی ام البنین سے اور کہا، اور یہ 7-8 سال بعد ہے کربلا کے واقعے کے، اور کہا کہ اے بی بی آپ جا رہی ہیں، بس جاتے جاتے کوئی نصیحت کر جائیے. وہاں پہ ایک رواج تھا نصیحت کر جائیے جاتے جاتے. تو بی بی نے اپنی آخری سانسوں میں بی بی نے کہا کہ مجھے اس سے اہم جملہ میری زندگی کوئی نہیں ہو سکتا. اور بی بی نے بس اتنا ہی کہا السلام علیکم یا ابا عبداللہ. یہ آخری جملہ بی بی کا اور آخری سانس. فَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ أَلَا لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ.
جزاک اللہ مولانا، جزاک اللہ. اللہ آپ کو سلامت رکھے. ماشاءاللہ سے بہت اچھے مسائل پڑھے. جزاک اللہ. یاد میں رکھو.
پارٹیسپینٹس کے لیے ایک 10-15 منٹ ہیں. اگر کوئی سوال جواب کریں تو سوال کرنا ہے تو کلیریفائی کرنا ہے تو مولانا کر دیں گے. آپ سے کچھ اگر بولنا ہے تو آ جائیے پلیز.
میں ابھی اسکرین شیئر کر رہا ہوں جیسا آپ نے بتایا، اگر آپ کو کچھ کہنا ہے اس کے بارے میں.
جی ہاں، یہ اسکرین جو ہے آپ کو، یہ ہمارے یونس بھائی جو بتا رہے ہیں، یہ ایک پارٹیسپینٹ جو ہے دیکھیے آپ کو انلارج کریے، اور اس میں یہ مولانا کا پہلا لیکچر ہے. یہ ایک محترمہ اس کو کئی وقت سنے ہیں اور لکھے ہیں. تو آپ دیکھیے کتنی محنت کر رہے ہیں وہ، اور ہم سب کو یہ جذبہ ہو اور جو ہے اس پہ عمل کرنے کا، اور دماغ میں، اور آپ مولانا ابھی جو بولے نا، جو انٹلیکٹ آپ کو ایک لیول سے دوسری لیول تک جانا ہے، تو ایک ایک چیز سنتے جائیں، لکھتے جائیں اور محنت کریں. تو انشاءاللہ ہمارا مقصد یہی ہے کہ نہج البلاغہ کا یہ یونیک سیشنز ہیں جس میں ہم سیکھ رہے ہیں مولانا سے. مولانا آپ کے علم میں اضافہ دے، آپ کے صحت میں جو ہے اضافہ دے، اور ہم سب دعا گو ہیں. شکریہ یونس بھائی. اور یہ ایک محترمہ نے اتنی محنت کی ہے، سو آپ کو بھی انکریج
جزاک
کریں.
اللہ جزاک اللہ. یہ تو انہی کا ظرف ہے، کیونکہ انسان جو سمجھتا ہے اور جو خود پھر اس کے بارے میں سوچتا ہے اور جو آگے اس کو کاغذ پہ قلم کے ساتھ کرتا ہے، تو یہ تو یقیناً ماشاءاللہ دیکھ کے مجھے واقعاً ان کے ظرف کی پہچان ہوئی کہ یہی تو انٹلیکٹ ہوتا ہے کہ ایک باپ سے آپ اپنے 1000 باپ کھولتے جاتے ہیں. تو ماشاءاللہ انشاءاللہ Allah will reward them for their efforts, and it's very very encouraging for me and heartwarming for me as well, because بالکل آپ صحیح کہہ رہے ہیں. this is یہ وہ ان ہستی کا یہ سرمن ہے جنہوں نے کائنات کو بنتے ہوئے دیکھا، اور جو جانتے ہیں کہ پرپس ہر چیز کا ہے کیا اور کریشن ہے کیا، جن کو اللہ نے بھیجا ہی اسی مقصد کے لیے کہ ہمیں وہاں تک پہنچا دے. تو ان کا ہر لفظ جو ہے واقعا، تو انشاءاللہ آپ کی کاوشوں کو اللہ جو ہے قبول فرمائے اور برکت آپ کے علم میں اضافہ فرمائے.
آقا السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ.
وعلیکم السلام.
وعلیکم السلام. کیسے ہیں عباس صاحب؟ ماشاءاللہ.
الحمدللہ. آج آپ کے اس سیشن میں آپ نے ایک علم کا دریا بہا دیا یا کوئی ریور لے جا کے سمندر میں ملا دی. اتنے سارے سبجیکٹس اور اتنی گہری اور باتیں کہ وہ انسان واقعی صاحب عقل و معرفت چاہیے. آپ کی ایک ایک جو ہے نا پوائنٹ نقطے کو مطلب کنسنٹریٹ کرنے کے لیے. تو نٹشل میں آپ سے یہی ریکویسٹ کہ جو ایمان آپ نے جو درجات پیغمبر کا ذکر کیا اس میں، اور فطرت کا ذکر کیا، اور نعمت کا ذکر کیا، اور انسان کے بھول جانے کا ذکر کیا، پھر اس کے بعد جو ہے نا ایک کے بعد دیگر جو ہے آپ پھر بعد میں بات پہنچی تبلیغ تک، اور پھر اس کے بعد عقل تک پہنچی بات. تو یہ اتنی ساری چیزیں ہیں جو میں اس کو نٹشل میں سے یہی پوچھنا چاہ رہا تھا کہ ہم جیسے نافہم اور ناکارہ لوگوں کے لیے جو ایمان کی منزل ہم کہتے ہیں نا کہ جو پہنچنا ہے ہمیں، تو ہمارا بہت سا تو یہ ہے کہ ہم سنا ہوا جو ہے علم ہے جو ہمارے یادداشت میں پہنچا ہوا ہے، لیکن یہ سنی سنائی باتوں کو عقل کی منزل کو لانے کے لیے کتنے درجات آپ نے طے کیے ہیں. تو مجھے وہ سلسلہ مجالس یاد ہے علامہ مشرف راوی کا کہ وہ کہتے ہیں کہ وہ عقائد کو معقولات کی منزل پہ لے کے آئے، عقل کی منزل پہ لے کے. جب تک عقل کی منزل پہ ہم یہ سارے جو مین اسٹریم جو آپ پوائنٹس بتائے ہیں اگر وہ عقل کی منزل پہ نہیں آتے ہیں تو آیا ممکن ہے کہ انسان جو ہے وہ ایمان یا ایقان یا معرفت کی منزل طے کر سکتا ہے جان؟
سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ. عباس بھائی بس میں ہر سنڈے کے آپ کے اس کامنٹ کا ضرور کوئی نہ کوئی انتظار کرتا ہوں، اور میرا خیال ہے کہ آپ نے اتنے خوبصورتی سے سمرائز بھی کر دیا اور اس کو جسے کہتے ہیں کہ سبمٹ بھی دیا. میں تو ادھر ادھر ہوتا ہوں ہر وقت، میری پتہ نہیں اٹینشن ڈیفیسٹ تھوڑا سا سمپٹمیٹ ادھر ادھر سمپٹمز ہے میرے اندر، تو آئی جمپ فرام پلیس ٹو پلیس. بالکل، لیکن الحمدللہ آپ نے بالکل بہترین کہا، اور آپ نے بھی اپنے سوال میں بھی آپ نے ہمیں جواب بھی دے دیا، ایکسپلین بھی کر دیا، تو اس لیے جزاک اللہ. اور بس میں تو اتفاق ہی کر سکتا ہوں اور کچھ نہیں، کیونکہ واقعا عقل اگر وہ انٹلیکچوئل ابیلٹی ہے، نہ ہی صرف یہ کہ جو غیب میں ہے اس کو ظاہر کرنا اپنے اندر، اور جب ظاہر ہو جائے تو وہ اصل ظہور ہے. تو بات یہ ہے کہ جب ہم اصل جو ہے غیب ہے، کیونکہ غیب پہلے تھا، ظاہر بعد میں آیا. اب جو آپ نے ایمان کا تذکرہ کیا، کیونکہ اسلام منزل ہے لیکن اسلام منزل تسلیم ہے، جیسے کہ آپ مجھ سے بہتر جانتے ہیں. اور جب ہم نے تسلیم کر لیا تو پھر اس کے بعد اگلی منزل ایمان کی آئے گی، اور جب ایمان کی منزل آئے گی تو اس کے بعد جو ہے پھر تقوی کی منزل آئے گی، اور تقوی کے بعد جو ہے پھر ہم آگے اور منزلیں آئیں گی، رضا کی منزل آئے گی. اور جہاں ہم رضا کی منزل پہ پہنچتے ہیں تو رضا میں جو ہے ایک الگ پہلو ہے، کیونکہ تسلیم جو ہے پہلی منزل ہے، لیکن تسلیم میں آپ ظاہر کو تسلیم کر رہے ہیں. ظاہر ان دا سینس کہ آپ تسلیم کر رہے ہیں کہ اللہ ہے اور اس نے یہ سب جو ظاہر ہے وہ اس نے بنایا، تو بات پھر بھی ظاہر کی ہے. اور اس کے بعد آپ تسلیم کر رہے ہیں کہ سسٹم ہے اور میں اس سسٹم میں ضرور چلوں گا، I will go according to this system. اس کے بعد آپ جو ہیں جب آپ رضا پہ پہنچ رہے ہیں، کیونکہ اسلام سے الکافی کی روایت کے مطابق امام نے کہا اور کہا کہ امام علیہ السلام نے کہا کہ اسلام سے ایمان، ایمان سے تقوی، تقوی سے رضا. تو رضا کی منزل میں تسلیم ہے، لیکن رضا کی منزل میں تسلیم ہے غیب کا. تو اب جو غیب جو اندر ظاہر ہو گیا، اب اس کو جب ہم تسلیم کرتے ہیں رضا کے ساتھ اور خوشی کے ساتھ، تو پھر ہم اس منزل پہ پہنچے. اور جیسے کہ آپ نے کہا کہ عقائد جو ہے جب اندر ظاہر ہو جاتے ہیں، یعنی کہ وہ اصل ہے، کیونکہ وہ پہلے تھا اور غیب پہلے تھا جس کو ہم اللہ کہتے ہیں، اور ظاہر بعد میں آیا. تو بس یہ ہے کہ جو بالکل اٹس آل انٹرنل، اینڈ دیٹس وائی لمحہ فکر ضروری ہے عبادت کے لیے، یعنی کہ فکر ضروری عبادت کے لیے. اور فکر وہی تو ہے جو اندر کی دنیا ہے، اس غیب کو اجاگر کرنا، اور وہ اصل ہے. اور ماشاءاللہ عباس بھائی، آپ جیسے لوگ آئی نو جو عرفان رکھتے ہیں اور جو اس دنیا کے بارے میں سوچتے رہتے ہیں، وہ جانتے ہیں کہ اس میں زیادہ لطف ہے، اور ابلیس کا حربہ یہی ہے کہ ہمیں ظاہر کی طرف ہی لے کے جائے. تو جو ہمیں ایوولوشن کرنا ہے وہ تو اندر ہے, اور جو اللہ ہمارے اندر سے چاہتا ہے کہ یہ ایوالو ہو کے بہت ہائی لیول تک جائے. ہم ایک گھر میں خوش ہیں, اللہ ہمیں ایک پورے سولر سسٹم دینا چاہتا ہے. وہ چاہتا ہے کہ ہمارا پلانٹس لو, وہ چاہتا ہے کہ ہم اپنے اوپر کنٹرول نہیں کر پاتے, وہ چاہتا ہے کہ ہم دنیاز کو کنٹرول کریں. تو انسان کو بنایا بہت بلندی کے لیے, لیکن جیسے آپ نے بہت خوبصورتی سے پیش کیا, اٹس انسائیڈ. سوری میں لمبا بول گیا,
جسٹ
آپ کی بات ہی اتنی اسٹیمولیٹنگ تھی.
جی جی. تو عباس بھائی آپ خان بولے یا عرفان بولے؟ میں معافی چاہتا ہوں, جسٹ وانٹ ٹو کلیریفائی.
عرفان تو ابھی مولانا جا رہے ہیں اس خطبے میں کہ اول الدین معرفت جو ہے نا, وہ معرفت کی منزل سے پہلے یہ ایقان جو ہے نا, ہمارا یقین جو ہے ہمارے جو اپنے عقائد ہیں,
سمجھ گیا.
یہ عقائد کے اندر عقل کی منزل پہ عقیدے کو سمجھتے نہیں ہیں. تو یہ تمام چیزیں جو ہم سنتے ہیں, توحید ہو, نبوت ہو, امامت ہو, قیامت ہو, اس کا بڑا سپرفیشل جو ہے ہمارے ذہن میں خاکہ ہے. لیکن جب عمل کی منزل ہمیں بتاتی ہے کہ جب ہم سے اعمال صالحہ سرزد نہیں ہوتے ہیں تو وہ واقعی یعنی ان عقائد کو ہم نے عقل کی کسوٹی پہ لایا نہیں ہے, صرف اس کو سماعت کی منزل تک محدود کیا ہوا ہے. جیسے مولانا نبی کہہ رہے تھے نا کہ انسان بھول جاتا ہے, تو یہ بھول جانے کے اوپر مجھے قرآن کی ایک آیت یاد آ گئی کہ أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. ہم جب دوسروں کے بارے میں جب بات کرتے ہیں تو بڑی بڑی جو ہے نا واعظ نصیحت اور خطبے اور آیتیں پڑھتے ہیں, تو خدا کہہ رہا ہے کہ تم دوسروں کو اچھائی کا حکم دیتے ہو اور اپنے آپ کو بھول جاتے ہو. وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. تو آگا کہ یہ اس کے مختلف نکات سے میں نے واقعی استفادہ کیا ہے. بسم اللہ حسین بھائی, آپ آگے پوچھیے سوالات.
نہیں ماشاء اللہ, بس I just wanted a clarification. جزاک اللہ.
السلام علیکم سر. شیبہ صاحب, how are you sir?
وعلیکم السلام, الحمدللہ. آپ کیسے ہیں
سر؟ اب عباس آپ نے اتنا ایسے سوالات کر دیے کہ میں کیا پوچھ سکتا ہوں. سر ایک بنیادی کوشچن تھا, صبح میں نے اپنے گروپ میں بھی ڈالا تھا کہ ہم لوگوں کو ریلیجن کی کیا ضرورت پڑی, واٹ از دا نیسیسٹی آف ریلیجن, جبکہ ہم قرآن میں ہر جگہ پہ ساری کتابوں میں یہ کہ جتنی بھی کائنات کی جو بھی چیز ہے جہاں بھی ہے, چاہے وہ یونیورسز ہو, چاہے نباتات ہو, ایوری تھنگ اللہ تعالیٰ کی پریز کر رہی ہے, اللہ تعالیٰ کو سجدہ زیر ہے, اللہ کو پریز کرے. تو پھر یہ ریلیجن, what was the necessity to bring religion and all 1,24,000, جب ہر چیز اللہ تعالیٰ کی ہی پریز کر رہی ہے اور کریشن کا مقصد ہی اس کی پریز کرنا ہے, تو پھر why religion؟
جی نہیں, بہت ویری امپورٹنٹ کوشچن, ایبسولوٹلی. اور واقعی یہ سوال بھی ایک کائنات ہے, اور I wouldn't say that I am equipped to even answer that or to attempt. کچھ observations جو ہیں لیکن پیش کر سکتے. Or so when we look at this, what we're seeing is that, okay, so creation now, and then we have religion. So one thing is, when the way I've understood the question is kyunki there's everything is already obeying Allah, worshiping Allah, praising Allah. Therefore, why not human beings also going in that category where it would have happened like that, and there would not have been a need for the testing or the implementation of a system of reminders and the religion itself, but rather it would have been the way it was. So I think then, one thing we can definitely say is, or at least one thing we can definitely think about, I would rather say, is that there's a free will concept involved as well, number one. And so what happens is when we're looking at human beings, and jab hum dekhte hain ki religion jisse hum keh rahe hain, really, religion hai kya? Religion hai basically reminder of reality. کیا یہ it's the system of rules in place, اور جتنی چیزیں ہیں, it's really just a reminder of reality. تو ایک reality ہے اور اس کا ریمائنڈ کیا جا رہا ہے. اب جب ریمائنڈ کیا جا رہا ہے تو کیوں کیا جا رہا ہے؟ کیونکہ فری ول کا کانسیپٹ بھی ہے اس میں. تو we also see that there is free will, and when we look at why was everything else created in that way, so what we have to also keep in mind is that what we know of creation in our earth and in our systems here, the ecosystems here, everything around us, this part of creation, at least what we can see is that we as the human beings, it's a testing ground for us. So therefore, everything we're seeing around us was created for us. That means that the food, the sustenance, even the animals and everything, all the multiple factors in nature, which are causing a balanced ecosystem of every kind around us, were created for us. So when they are praising Allah, now the purpose really is not now that there's an earth and everything on this is praising Allah. Rather, the purpose is there's an earth and there's a testing ground. And everything else, in what sense is it praising Allah? Well, maybe many of them are praising Allah in a literal sense, where, the singing of a bird is actually in a language that praises Allah that I don't understand. But there's also a praising of Allah in the sense that they are fulfilling the purpose of their creation. And the purpose of their creation is to live their life here and to create many factors around us so that we who are existing in the middle of all these factors, now we have a testing ground. So it wasn't that we need a universe now where everything's going to praise Allah. Rather, what Allah chose to do was to create a universe where free will be tested and people will be seen if they choose to believe or choose not to believe. So what we call as religion really is simply nothing but a reminder of that system that is in place for testing us.
थैंक यू सर. सर इसका मतलब तो ये क्या कि कुछ लोग जो बाय चांस होते हैं मुसलमान, जैसा मैं मुसलमान घराने में पैदा हुआ तो बाय चांस हुआ, बाय चॉइस होते हैं पढ़ के और मतलब सब कुछ करके, तो जो लोग बाय चॉइस हो रहे हैं वो हमसे ज्यादा बेहतर हैं क्योंकि वो पढ़ के हो रहे हैं. हम लोग क्योंकि घराने में पैदा हुए इसलिए फॉलोइंग द फुटस्टेप्स.
आपकी बात I would agree in that sense जी. एक लिहाज से तो देखिए, हम जब इसको envision करते हैं तो हम आपने word by chance किस sense में use किया, लेकिन एक और sense में अगर मैं बात करूं तो क्योंकि कोई चीज coincidence नहीं है, कोई चीज luck नहीं है, तो इतना खूबसूरत निज़ाम है कि अल्लाह ने प्लेस किए हैं souls मुख्तलिफ generations में, मुख्तलिफ mothers में, wombs में, ताकि और उसी के फैसला है कि कौन कौन से खानदान में पैदा होगा और कैसे होगा. और वाकईन बाज के लिए फिर ये शायद कहा जा सकता है कि वो उस खानदान में पैदा हुए लेकिन कन्वर्ट हो गए, और या रिवर्ट कह लें, they came towards Islam. तो यानी कि Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that this person will have faith and he knew how much they would need. So maybe some of us need a little more cultivation and maybe some of us less. लेकिन फिर ये भी आर्ग्यू किया जा सकता है कि शायद उस वक्त यौम अल-अस्र में जिन लोगों ने सच्ची गवाही दी थी उनमें से बहुत को जो है मुसलमानों में पैदा कर दिया. लेकिन हकीकत तो ये है कि मिक्स है, एवरीथिंग्स मिक्स. तो बहुत से लोग हैं जो मुसलमान खानदान में पैदा हुए लेकिन बाद में पता चला, एक्शन से पता चला कि नहीं, फेथ नहीं था. और बहुत से हैं जो वाकईन दूसरे मज़हब में, लेकिन हमने देखा कि फेथ था और उनके एक्शन से पता चला कि उनके अंदर ज्यादा फेथ था. ट्रू.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच सर.
थैंक यू.
सब लोग जो है मौलाना के लिए दुआ करें, और मौलाना अम्मा युजीबुल जो लोग बीमार हैं और हम इस जो बोलते हैं ना आफतों में जो फंसे हुए हैं, लोगों को टेंशन है, स्ट्रेस है, ये स्ट्रेस निकालने के लिए आपके मुतबर्रिक आवाज से जो है सबके लिए दुआ करें.
जी बारिल्लाह, तमाम मुमिन मुमिनात, तमाम लोग जो दुनिया में परेशान हाल हैं, ख़ास तौर पे हमारे सामईन और इनके अहल में और अजीज़ों में जो परेशान हाल हैं, जो बीमार हैं, जो जिस मुश्किल में हैं, और इस वबा की वजह से जिन मुश्किलात में हैं, उन सब मुश्किलात से दूरी अता फरमा, निजात फरमा, बीमारी से शिफायाबी अता फरमा. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء يا أرحم الراحمين بحق محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآله
इंशाल्लाह फिर नेक्स्ट संडे मौलाना आपसे
إن شاء
क्या
الله
वक्त तमाम हो गया?
जी हो गया